This is a Brothers Grimm story called The Drummer. So, if you're sitting comfortably, we'll begin the story. Of course, it was a long, long time ago, for it was back in the days when giants were still walking in Middle Earth and forests still covered the land. There was a drummer who lived in a city with his parents, but he liked to leave the city and walk through the forest and walk around the lake. And one day, as he was walking around the lake, he saw laying on the ground 3 pieces of beautifully woven linen. And linen, of course, is very valuable. And so he picked up one of the pieces of linen and took it home. And that night, as he was laying in his bed, he sensed that there was someone in the room, someone hovering just above his bed. And a beautiful, soft voice began to speak to him and said, "You took my white linen blouse from beside the lake. Without my white linen blouse, I cannot fly back to the top of the glass mountain." And the drummer was a little bit taken aback by this. I said, "But who are you? What are you doing here?" And so the voice said, "I am a princess. I am the daughter of a king, but I have been enchanted by a witch, and now I live in a stone cottage on the very top of the glass mountain. And every day I go down to the lake and bathe with my sisters. But without my blouse, I cannot fly back to the top of the mountain." So the princess appeared at the foot of the drummer's bed, and he happily returned to her white blouse. The next day he thought about this and thought, how could he help her? And he knew that the way to the glass mountain lay through the forest, and he knew that giants, the man-eaters, lived in the forest. And the drummer took his drum with him and followed the path through the forest. But he didn't see any giants. So he took his drum and began to play. And sure enough, a giant as tall as a fir tree appeared in front of him. And the giant said, "Why are you beating your drum so loudly? You woke me up." And the drummer said, "I am drumming to let the 1,000 people behind me know which way to walk." And the giant peered short-sightedly down the path, and although he couldn't see 1,000 people, he did believe the drummer, because just between you and me, giants aren't that bright. The drummer said, "If you take me to the glass mountain, I will tell my friends not to bother you." So the giant picked up the drummer, placed him on his shoulders, and with his long strides he walked swiftly through the forest and placed the drummer at the foot of the glass mountain. So all the drummer had to do now was climb the steep, slippery sides of the mountain of glass. And he tried, but Every time he made a little way up the mountain, he would just slide back down again. And he stood at the foot of the mountain, wondering what on earth to do. So it was then that he heard two men arguing. And he walked over to where they were shouting at each other and saw two men looking at a saddle. And the drummer asked them what they were quarrelling about. And the two men said, "This is a magical saddle. Simply sit on it, tell it where you want to go, and in the space of a heartbeat you will find yourself there. If you know where to get one of these saddles, can you let me know?" So the first man said, "It's my turn to use the saddle, but he won't let me." And the second man said, "It's my turn." And the drummer said, "I can settle this quarrel." There's a white birch tree over there. Race to it. Whoever makes it to the silver birch first can use the saddle today. So the two men ran off at a fast sprint, and while they were gone, the drummer sat on the saddle and wished himself to be at the top of the glass mountain. And in less time than it takes to tell, he found himself there. And the top of the glass mountain was actually flat. And there was space for a stone cottage. And in front of the stone cottage was a deep pond. And behind the cottage, going all the way down the mountain, was a forest of old trees. And it was then that the witch herself came out of the stone house and asked the drummer what it was that he wanted from her. A bed for the night, food to eat. And the witch said, "I will grant you those, but I will expect you to complete some tasks in the morning." The witch turned and went back into her little stone house, and it was then that a maiden, and of course she was beautiful, because everyone's beautiful really, came out of the cottage and thanked him for returning her beautiful linen blouse. And the next day, the witch told the drummer what the task was that she had set him. She gave him a thimble, and with the thimble he was to empty the deep fish pond and place all the fish together by kind and in order of size. So the drummer began to try and bail out the pond with the thimble. But of course no one can empty a pond with a thimble. And by midday, when the sun was high in the sky, he was so relieved to see the maiden, the princess, come to bring him a basket of food. And she said, "Lay down, go to sleep in my lap, all will be well." So the drummer, what with the heat of the day and feeling tired from all his hopeless bailing, lay down and put his head in the maiden's lap. And when he awoke, he found that the pond was empty and all the fish were arranged in order of size and kind, for the maiden had twisted her magical ring and made a wish and the water from the pond had simply risen up and joined the other clouds in the sky, and the fish had simply jumped out of the pond. Well, the maiden said, "There is one fish which is not with others of its own kind. When the witch comes, pick up that fish and throw it at her." So when the witch came and saw that the drummer had completed the impossible task, he picked up the one odd fish and threw it at her. The next morning, the witch said to the drummer, "I will set you a more difficult task today. You are to cut down all the trees of the forest." Storytellers do not generally advocate cutting down trees, by the way. "You are to cut down all the trees of the forest." And she gave him an axe, but it was blunt. And he set about with the blunt axe, trying to cut down the trees. But by the time the sun was high in the sky at midday, the maiden came to see him, the basket of food, and as before she bid him to lay down and sleep with his head in her lap. And when he awoke, he found that she had again made a wish, and by magic all the trees were laying horizontally, and all the logs had been cut and arranged in size. And the maiden said, "There is one branch left over. When the witch comes this evening, strike her with the branch." So that evening, the witch was still not impressed, even though it seemed to her that the drummer had completed an impossible task, because she thought she was the only one who could work magic. So the drummer picked up the one odd branch and struck the witch with it. And the next morning, the task that the witch gave to the drummer was to make a great fire with all the logs and burn them. And the maiden helped the drummer and said to him, "When the witch comes this evening, there will be one branch in the middle of the fire that will not be burning. She will ask you to take it out. You will be able to do this without being burned. And when you have done that, pick up the witch and throw her into the fire." And so, when the witch came and saw the one branch that wasn't burning, the drummer stepped into the fire. Don't try this at home, by the way. This is magic. The drummer stepped into the fire and pulled out the only branch that wasn't alight, and that branch transformed into the princess. And then the drummer, who was angry with the witch for having destroyed the forest, picked her up and threw her into the fire. And the memory of the trees must have lived on in the dead branches, the dead logs. Perhaps the dryads still lived on, even though the trees had been cut down, and the fire gladly enclosed itself over the witch. And the princess said, "Now I am free. We can return to the city." And she took him inside the stone cottage and showed him where the witch had stored the gems and the jewels that she had accumulated over her long life. So the princess said to the drummer, "We will return to the city. When you see your parents, make sure that you do not kiss them on the right cheek. If you kiss them on the right cheek, you will forget. All your memories of me will be eroded. It is time for us to marry and return to my father. So the next day, the two young people returned to the city, and the princess, the maiden, waited outside the city gates, while the drummer went and found his parents and showed them all the gemstones that he had taken from the witch. But in his joy, he forgot what the princess had said to him. And when he kissed his parents, he kissed them both on the right cheek. And the memory of the princess simply left his mind. So the maiden waited and waited and waited. But her young lover didn't appear. So when she realised what had happened, she magicked herself a little wooden cottage in the woods, and it was there that she lived while she waited for him. And during the day she lived in her little cottage in the woods all alone, with only the wild animals for company. And in the evenings she walked into the city, and she watched as a fine manor house was built with the money that the drummer had gained by selling the witch's jewels. And one day, as she was walking past, she heard people on the road gossiping, and they said, "He is to marry tomorrow. He is to marry the bride that his parents found for him." And the maiden, who still loved her drummer, was bereft, but she came up with a plan to win him back, for he was her one true love. So the princess twisted her wishing ring and made a wish for a dress as beautiful as the sun. So when she went to the house, she heard people gossiping, and they said, "It's to be a fine wedding. There are to be 3 days of celebrations, and they will be married on the 4th day." And so the princess went into the manor house where the first evening of celebrations was being held, wearing her beautiful dress that looked as though it had been woven from the rays of the sun himself. And the bride looked at the dress and thought, "I must have that dress." The princess said, "It's not for sale for money, but I would trade it with you if tonight I can sleep outside the bridegroom's door." The bride was a cunning woman. She had some knowledge of herbs, a little knowledge of magic herself, and she made a sleeping potion that she poured into the drummer's wine. So that night he slept and slept. And when the princess, who was laying outside his door, called to her drummer, "Why have you forgotten me?" he didn't hear her. The second night of the wedding celebrations, the princess twisted her ring and made a wish and asked for a dress as beautiful as the moon. And she appeared at the manor house in a dress that looked as if it had been made out of pure moonlight. And the bride knew that she had to have the dress. And once again she made a sleeping potion and poured it into the bridegroom's wine. And once again the princess traded her magical, beautiful dress for a night outside the door of her beloved drummer. And once again he didn't hear as she called to him. But that night, a serving girl, who was rather taken with the princess, told her about the sleeping potion. And that day, the serving girl told the bridegroom, the drummer, that his bride was adding a sleeping potion to his wine. So that night, the bridegroom didn't drink the wine. And that night, the princess arrived at the manor house in a dress made of pure starlight. So when she traded her star dress with the bride for the ability to sleep outside the bridegroom's door, he was awake and he heard her soft cries. And the two of them went to the drummer's parents and told them all that had happened, and it explained that they were very much in love. And so the drummer married his princess, and the false bride had to be content with a dress made from sunshine, a dress made from moonbeams, and a dress made from starlight. But of course, this is your bit. Okay, you know the last line. Come on, you know it. So of course the princess and the drummer, come on, you can do this, lived happily ever after. As I hope shall all of you. There are more Brothers Grimm stories on my channel, so please do subscribe. I also have a Facebook group called Witches in Stories and one called Giants in Story. So listen to some stories. Don't worry too much about remembering word for word. Just listen to them and make them your own, and have a go at telling yourself, because it's enormous fun. And we need to keep the giants and the witches and the princesses and the drummers and the magic alive, because stories are a form of magic. Hope to see you again soon. Take care. And may you all live happily ever after too.